Hello, everyone, and welcome to another session of Your Desk University, bringing you live learning with AEC tech experts directly to your desk. Our goal is to provide really high-quality presentations for people who are learning tech in the AEC industry. So everybody from a beginner, well, kind of an intermediate computational designer. There's a lot of one-on-one classes out there, and we don't really see a need to overlap with that. So from everyone from like an intermediate computational designer all the way to kind of a medium level software developer. So our goal is to provide content that will be interesting to you. If you have feedback for us, we love to hear it. If we go back and look at all the things that we have had over this series, you can go to our website here, yourdeskuniversity.com. I'm just going to scroll to the top. I went here over the past recordings, and I can find all the previous recordings. So if I start from the very beginning, we had John Pearson with Dynamo Why So Serious, really great presentation. Face shield making, we learned from people who are actually in the action making face shields today. If you're probably tuning into this, you might be 3D printing. If you are, we'd also love to hear that. Repeatable Grasshopper, which will kind of overlap maybe into some of the stuff we're doing here with Rhino Inside today. Best practices for creating code libraries. You'll find a really large variety. General discussions on culture, how to present how to prepare great sessions. We talked to Willow, Sidewalk Labs, and Integrated Projects about capturing spatial data and how they use digital twin data. Data and Richard presented on Dynamo for the masses. I mean, we've had 16 incredible presentations. Entrepreneurs telling us. I spoke myself about Python reusable and Grasshopper, Dynamo, and Dynamo and PyRevit, accessible documentation with Asan, and I'm not going to go through the rest of these, but I really recommend you go back to our website and look at some of these old shows. And some of you I see in the chat already, welcome. We've seen you before, and we know you have been tuning in. We've also posted a few new episodes, and I just want to kind of go backwards to today's show. So our last show for this, what I'm calling it as a semester, is Autodesk presenting on Dynamo, the things that you may have missed. Come to that, bring your questions. We'll also have 4 people, an architect, fabricator, researcher, and engineer presenting about building envelopes. That'll be, I mean, these are all interesting. I keep wanting to say everyone's really interesting, but I think I'm just as excited as you are about these. Andrew Human, we're really excited to have him on, teaching us a data tree masterclass. And with that, we get to today's show. And today's show is going to be at Rhino Inside. I do want to get to our presenter, but also like a little bit about our current work situation. We're all in kind of these weird situations. And so one of the things that I experienced today is I decided to go back to the office. Hi, Dane, by the way, you're on camera now. And I actually got my office chair. And I was, my office, they were okay with me going back and grabbing an office chair. I've been sitting on a card table, a card table, like a folding chair. And I also wonder, for those who are tuning in, what's something different about your work environment? And with that, I'm going to start inviting Dane to share us something about his working environment that's been different.
Yeah, it's been, this whole thing has been pretty interesting. It's kind of odd. Architecture is actually my second career. I started out as an automotive fabricator, and I built race cars for years. So kind of returning to the garage was not a very foreign thing to me. I'm actually probably more home here than in the office. But that being said, you really do start to appreciate and understand why office chairs are so expensive, because I can tell you, sitting on anything other than one for 8 hours a day is pretty darn tough. So I wish everyone out there the best with their current working situations, and I think I see a lot of home improvements in our future.
Yeah, you're not the first presenter. It looks like you're sitting maybe on a gaming chair. You're not the first presenter sitting on a gaming chair. Is that what that is?
It's actually it's a seat to my old Porsche that's behind me. It's the old seat that I mounted on a stand. It's the most comfortable thing I have.
There you go. Yeah. So Dane comes to us from ZGF. ZGF's a prominent architectural firm, and when I approached both Autodesk and Rhino McNeil about doing a presentation for Your Desk University, I asked both of them about how to prepare a session that would be really practical and useful to you, our audience. Rhino McNeil, actually, there they are. Hi guys. They basically said Dane Stokes is really good. He knows the practical stuff, and Dane leads the Seattle user group for computational design. I think they do both Dynamo and Rhino and other things. But I really had a pleasure of meeting him through this, and I know one thing I learned already from him. First of all, everything you're going to learn today about Grasshopper, but he recommended that I take a virtual commute after the day to go take a walk outside, maybe for 20 minutes to just decompress from work and come into my home and my family. And if that works for you, I highly recommend it as well. He's focused on automation. He comes originally as an architect, but for the last 10 years, he's been an avid Rhino and computational user. So with that, Dane, I turn it over to you with Rhino Inside. And I know you're going to do a little intro. I do want to kind of like tell our audience, intros are not our focus. So Dane's going to give us a little bit of intro to Rhino Inside because it's such a new technology, but he's going to focus a lot on the uses of it in practical. So keep asking questions, and we'd love to see more. So thanks, Dane.
Roll with it. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Definitely excited for Andrew Human next week as well. So I wanted to start out kind of explaining the context that we're using Rhino Inside in. We're a very large firm, and we've found, we obviously use Revit as our main design tool in the later phases, and we found that interacting with Revit has a certain opaqueness to it, and I think a lot of you understand. It's a wonderful filing cabinet to organize objects, but when it comes time to actually understanding what's in your filing cabinet, things may be a little opaque to you. Also, we have a lot of downstream workflows that are dependent on a Revit model, but need to have a deliverable in Rhino, such as our model shop, our 3D printers, and renderers, etc. So we start to look at, the interoperability has always been this kind of holy grail that, I can think back just 3 years, the struggle we had intelligently transferring data from one medium to another. I've been using Rhino for a long time, but I never was really able to achieve the level of success with Dynamo that I was with Grasshopper, just as far as the flexibility as a kind of mature computational tool. So an interesting thing happened when Rhino started developing Rhino 7. They realized that when they took apart Rhino to kind of reevaluate how to put it back together, they realized they could actually deploy Rhino inside of other 64-bit Windows programs as a secondary program. And along with being able to deploy that, along came all of the accessibility of complex geometry manipulation. These are McNeil, they specialize in shapes, right? To a very high level. So what happens when you start being able to deploy Rhino and Grasshopper inside of Revit is you really start to work with your whole brain. If the McNeil Rhino environment is a place where we can fluidly model and quickly iterate, and Revit is the place that we can store away meaningful information in a predictable place, we shouldn't be using one at a time. We should be thinking with our whole brain simultaneously. So I kind of want to just dive into it. Where the state of Rhino Inside is right now, it's still in beta, but it's moving very fast. There are new features every single day. So as a firm, we've very proactively hopped on the bandwagon, and luckily McNeil has been really receptive to our feedback, because it's really important to us to dive in head first as early as possible, so that this thing gets really built to fulfill all of our needs. So what happens is this is a kind of fun experiment where, under add-ins, there's a Rhino button, and then when you deploy Rhino Inside, you actually get a Rhino button and a Grasshopper button inside of Revit. And like we said earlier, you can deploy Rhino Revit inside of Rhino and Grasshopper inside of any 64-bit program, but in order to interact with them with Grasshopper, you would need to build nodes that can communicate with the host program and can use the same terms. So basically, think of it as Dynamo nodes, only it's inside of Grasshopper. For example, if you wanted to get all of the floors in your model, this is very similar to what a Dynamo user might experience. This is basically, this combination of nodes is the get all elements of category node, kind of how we would do this in Grasshopper. So what we're starting to see is all of these Revit nodes are starting to get populated in Rhino Inside as it's getting developed and matures as a product. So kind of every day, literally every Wednesday, there's new features that pop up. So I'm going to show you kind of some of the basic ways that we're pulling Revit information into Rhino to understand our Revit environment and our models better. Since we have a little bit of limited time, I'm not going to cover the other half of the equation, which you can definitely use this technology to put Rhino geometry into Revit as well. It is an interoperability solution with a computational engine in the middle. So imagine you have your left brain and your right brain and Grasshopper in the middle. That's a powerful equation right there. So let's start out with something really simple. Let's just get geometry from Revit into Rhino. This is something usually when I'm building a tool, especially one that's for other users, I might build it in a less intelligent way, but in a more copy-pasty way. So here, for example, if we wanted to get all of the floors of our object, from our model, our Revit model, we're going to choose from a model picker. We're going to choose our category. Rhino Inside has something called a filter. So it's like a logical filter. You can say, grab all the categories of a certain kind, grab, parameter filters, everything like that. We're going to grab the geometry from these elements, which this is a powerful node that we'll see later too, where you can actually start stripping geometry out of families and analyzing it in Revit. So what we see here when we get the geometry, and then in Grasshopper we can preview it too. So what we see here is this whole Revit model is being transferred over to Rhino, and I actually have Revit is open, Grasshopper is reading, Rhino is showing. And you can do this for any kind of category, and you can also filter your geometry as well. So let's look at something a little more complex here. Let's say for our walls, we do the same thing that we did before. We grab our wall category, we get those elements, and now, just like Dynamo, we can read parameters as well. So here we're grabbing the type parameter for all of the walls. And I'm going to say, using a text match tool, grab all the type parameters that have interior in the name. So we can very simply start filtering. And this is another thing, by the way, I usually have 3 screens, and you can see why. Doing tutorials on this is definitely a gymnastics effort. But anyway, here, if I highlight these, you can see these are all of my exterior walls because I'm filtering by type. And then these are all of my interior walls. So I can very quickly start pulling out Revit models. For example, our model shop, that's actually where I started at ZGF. I interned in the model shop, and 3 times more time goes into cleaning up a Revit file to be ready for a model to be built of it than the model takes to build. Just because there are so many extraneous categories. There's so much junk in a Revit model that needs to be cleaned out to make it valuable. And it's a process that needs to be done. So what we see here is this is just a tool that, since Revit is such a predictable environment, we can run Grasshopper tools on Revit models again and again and again, and they really don't fail, because a wall is going to be on a wall category. It's not like Rhino where you can make a custom layer that's named something else. Having the structure of Rhino or of Revit is really helpful here.
So you're saying like
So
the database that is Revit that everyone's kind of building things into, and the geometry and
yeah,
the algorithms that are now in Rhino and Grasshopper. I know they've done a ton with their geometry algorithms. Like having those two married together is really powerful. Is that kind of what you're saying?
yeah, and for example, we've been using Grasshopper tools for literally over a decade, but we don't have solid enough Rhino templates that we can know for sure that people will put floors on a floor layer. So if you were to run a tool that was looking for something on a specific layer across a firm of 700 people, the likelihood of something being categorized correctly in Rhino versus something being categorized correctly in Revit, especially pertaining to categories or something, these tools will just run, because Revit is such a predictable, it's doing its job being a predictable database that we can code again. So that's really awesome. Before we move on to a new tool, I'm just going to show you one more way that we can filter objects. You can get access to every single parameter in an object, and you can do whatever you want with it in Rhino Inside. So for example, materials too. If I look at the topography categories, there are 3 elements inside of this model, and here we can see there's like grass here, there's pavement, and then there's an interior kind of court grass thing here. If I want these to show properly, I can grab the material parameter and then I can read these as well. And we can see, one of these is tarmac and 2 of these are grass. And then we can control what layer in Rhino they go onto and how they're displayed as well. So think of how you can, this is a wonderful tool for starting to pull geometry out of our Revit model into something that we can really start to understand. And then like Grasshopper, like Dynamo, this is not real in Rhino yet. But getting that is just as easy as right-clicking and we can bake. And then we literally have all of our geometry. Here's all of our windows in our project baked out in Rhino.
So that's where you're kind of marrying like the information about Revit and the capabilities of Rhino. And I'm gonna throw a teaser out here for those who are kind of like still who are watching. I think you're gonna say show us something about how Rhino and Grasshopper uses animations with the Revit data. That's gonna be a really cool. I'll just teaser for later.
Exactly. So I think this is just covering how you can bring geometry over. And this looks really easy, but interoperability is an incredibly difficult thing. And being someone who's been trying to crack this for years, it's amazing to have something that is this functional right out the bat. Another thing you'll notice, Dynamo users look in awe. You can actually have multiple definitions open at once. And for a software that is designed for creating tools by kind of copying and pasting, you'd think this would be the #1 priority, to be able to have multiple things open. So, very rarely do I make something from scratch. It's very copy pasting, internet, past tools, a homologation, and then we refine. So opening another tool is as simple as just clicking on it. And now we have a new Grasshopper animation or a tool that is looking at this same model. Model's still open, but now we see all of these fun colored boxes.
Now, as you keep going, we did get a question in the chat regarding the scripts that you're showing. Are these going to be available for people later on?
Yeah, they will be. I'd be happy to share these.
Okay. And so now that he said that, I'll put them in the comments below. And then anybody who's on our Slack channel, which you can find access to on our website, we'll post a link in there as well. Thanks.
And I'll also show you some really good resources that McNeil has provided as well that have a lot of tools and descriptions in there as well.
Great.
At the end. So what we see here is false colored room volumes based on our model. At first, I thought they'd screwed up this kind of sample model, but if you look
Looks like a
at the
gap.
building, there's actually a drop ceiling on floor 2, which does affect the room volume. It's kind of interesting. But anyway, as someone that used Dynamo for a long time, but was always a Grasshopper user at heart, I knew what was capable, but I wasn't able to do it in Dynamo. And one of those things was animations. I have never spent longer getting 10 frames out of Dynamo than I did the one time I tried to do it. But here you can see in Rhino Inside, it's actually really easy. What we're doing here is we are same thing as the last definition. We're grabbing the room category and we're grabbing all the elements from that category. And then we are false coloring them based on their name. So all the unique room names get a unique color, and then they're also tagged with the parameter value from Revit. So this is actually live reading a Revit model and showing you the data inside of that model. And using the animation tools within Grasshopper, you can animate all of your rooms coming into your building. This is just a very basic example, but you could do any number of things. We've done some incredibly complicated animations using Rhino models in the past, and now the ability to just tie into a live Revit model means that we can kind of it's a lot more efficient for us to do something really complex.
Yeah, that's a really cool animation. What was your like project use case? What was your kind of reason of creating that?
For this, it was just this was just a demo to show that things can move, but
because it's kind of like building your spaces as you're going, so you can kind of understand the space planning and et cetera on each floor as you're going.
So we have some very large projects, airports, for example, that you may have 1,000 rooms that all have to be active at the same time, but there are 40 different phases on how they move to keep an airport working while you're remodeling it. So you can actually you can have a phase parameter inside of your rooms, and then you could phase a whole building based on where everything needs to be at a certain time. And it's Grasshopper, so you could run that off an Excel sheet, whatever you wanted. And then creating a video is literally you right click and you say, I want to animate this. And then you can choose how many frames. You can choose what you're looking at. And then it exports all the frames that you can throw into After Effects or anything. So
yeah,
it's
that's really cool. And I'm sure like the viewers who are really Grasshopper savvy are like, oh yeah, animate. Like I've been doing that over and over. But the people who, we're kind of like marrying two different kind of communities into one thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's cool.
And
you got it very cool from the comments as well. So I'm not the only one who sees that.
An interesting thing we've really seen is a lot of people are like, oh man, Dynamo's so screwed, why would anybody blah, blah, blah. But the great thing I've seen is a lot more Rhino users are starting to dig into Revit. Because now they have an interesting way. Imagine if you had a chunk of land and just half a shovel, you're not going to start digging holes in there, but you get a shiny new shovel, like, oh, what can I build? And that's totally what's happening, where a lot of really talented people that have their brain just doesn't work the way that Revit does. They're the Rhino people that work in shapes and are super iterative. Now they kind of feel like, oh, I can dig into Revit and I can start getting into the data in a forum, like with a tool that I'm already familiar with.
Yeah.
And we're seeing this kind of blossoming of creativity amongst people that have never been interested in digging into Revit before, and now they're doing amazing things. I think my boss Trevor has said this repeatedly. Like, in order to be interested in these kind of things, you kind of have to be inherently lazy. Like, I don't want to place 500 trees. Are you crazy? There's got to be a better way. And even if you spend more time figuring out an automated way to place all the trees, you never have to do it again.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of curiosity is what creates really exciting tools. I'm going to show you the last thing I'm going to share with you today. Um, so a lot of our models are very, very large. We have a lot of million plus square foot buildings that may have 40 to 60,000 pieces of furniture in them. And I think a lot of you know that, I've certainly had dynamo definitions break because all of the parameters in the furniture were in Italian because they were downloaded from somewhere on the internet. And they're super complex. So what we see here is again, this is a live link where now we're grabbing, I've kind of made a picker where you can choose what furniture you would like to look at, and then also different ways that you can sort the furniture. And this is a matrix that's telling you all of the furniture systems, specialty equipment, and lighting families that are in your model. And it also tells you how many of them there are and how many faces there are. Or you can resort just by face count. I just want to, oh man, this thing's complex. Well, that could just be a rectangle, couldn't it? Like how important is this? Or we can just say, find me the most common, there are 60 of these chairs in here. Maybe if I rethink the way that I rebuild this, our syncing time might go down. And furniture is a really, it is a real weight to a model. And this model is cute. It's just, the quote unquote advanced model, which is funny because it's a little baby. But if I show you, this is running this tool on one of our hospitals. And for example,
so you're basically QCing the families inside of the entire model and seeing how complex they were built. Is that what I'm kind of understanding?
Exactly. And the interesting thing here, so I can actually, I can save all of these families out as a Rhino file. So I'll literally send the team a Rhino file of all their models, and you can see it. You can see this better than you could ever see it in kind of the Revit environment. And it helps you. We find so many like keyboards with every single key put in. Recessed logos, and all of those faces used many times across your model do add up. One of my favorite things is lighting equipment. And this makes sense. Like if you were making lights, your model, you wouldn't just be like, well, this is basically an extruded rectangle. You'd show every single LED because that's like, you might as well say, oh, that skyscraper is just a rectangle, whatever. But it's really the scale, and is it important to what you're doing? As an architect, I would tell you that light is basically just a rectangle, and it should be in our models. But what we get from, this is actually 1,020 faces inside this one family, and it's used 232 times. Was that 250,000 faces just from this piece of lighting? And if we zoom in, sure enough, we see every single embossed little tiny thing. And this is something that will just passively live in your model, and you'll have 45-minute sync times, and that'll be your life. So this kind of being able to QC, and we've gotten great response from our user base because this is actually fun to interact with. This is a meaningful piece of data that they can go back and really correct their models and get real returns. And it also prioritizes things. You don't have to blindly sort around. Just fix that one light and see what happens. I bet amazing things will happen to your model. And this is just another way that the being able to use the geometrical know-how of Rhino against the database of Revit is the best kind of holistic use of software knowledge I can think of.
And what I'm seeing here is really, I mean, you're talking about it as QCing faces inside of families. But what I'm seeing here is really this graphic and this chart, which could be used in other ways. Have you used this type of graphic in any other ways? Or if you're watching in the chat, can you think of other ways that this type of graphic could be used? I can think of it as like, I mean, we're structural engineers, so we do a lot of, like tonnage takeoffs, and to find out like what parts of our building, are contributing the most, or where are we carbon heavy? Maybe are some potential spaces. But what about you?
I mean, there really is just kind of endless possibilities as far as taking advantage of the visualization aspect. You know, I joke a lot, but it's totally true. If you and Grasshopper users who have used it professionally will know, I have literally built my career on this node. If you can false color objects with data, you are gold, because it makes data meaningful.
Mm.
And it really is just this node, that all of a sudden things seem to click. And then you can put that in a rendered context. Um, Decisions really do start to be made quicker than hemming and hawing about what might be in your Revit model or what might be bad.
Yeah, those are really cool. And you're going to be sharing all of this with the users. Is that what you said?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, obviously, off
So
of the advanced model, like you're not going to send your
yeah,
complicated project.
I've got some ready to go. The last thing I'll share with you is kind of the resources that have been really valuable. So if you on Rhino3D.com, there's a /inside /Revit. There's a huge, wonderful resource. Here's where you can install. I'll say the only thing you really need is to have a current Rhino license, and then you get the work in progress for free. And then Rhino Inside is free. And then, so there are instructions on how to do that. There are also a ton of great guides. So if we look at, you want to know how floors, or there's obviously it's still in progress, but Hassan's been putting together these really good kind of examples, and as a way to get kind of new tools to us immediately. He has these extra kind of Python nodes that will, when the time is right, and they're kind of constantly getting fed into the deployment version of Rhino Inside. But if you can't do something with what you see in your current version of Rhino Inside, come here, because there's a ton of good stuff as far as this is what we just went over here, how to grab elements, the whole basics to kind of get you started. But anyone that's familiar with Grasshopper will be familiar enough with the interface to be curious to dive into Revit. Anyway, anybody that knows Dynamo will know the Revit API well enough to overcome the difference in the Grasshopper environment, and they really are targeting 100% Revit API coverage. So by the time this thing is done, anything you can do with Revit, you'll be able to do with Grasshopper, which let that sink in for a while.
Yeah, that's going to be really powerful. So I know that Rhino comes with a lot of packages. You can go on to Food for Rhino and you can find all kinds of things. Some of them are replicated in Dynamo, like Lunchbox and things like that. But some of them are unique to run the Rhino and Grasshopper environment. Have there been any packages that you've been really kind of excited to be using inside of Rhino with some accessibility now to Revit? I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah. I know. I think all of the Grasshopper packages that already existed, say Diva or Honeybee or any one of those, it's interesting because they're still relatively unchanged, or they could be relatively unchanged, and now you can just grab Revit data, make Rhino stuff, and then all of your tools that already existed with all the Grasshopper packages will already work. So that's pretty cool. I will say too, I think we've done a lot of amazing work with Dynamo, and I don't want to knock it that much, but Clockwork, Lunchbox, and probably Spring nodes. If you didn't have those three, Dynamo was not a functioning program in my mind. Like you were missing some major pieces. And I think even with Rhino Inside, in the beta that it's in right now, they're doing a really good job of trying to cover everything. So in order to have the Revit functionality that um, that you need, I think they'll be able to provide that, and you won't be as dependent on some of the bigger third-party plugins just to get the thing working.
Yeah, as you continue, I'm just going to encourage people. I put a couple messages, but if you do have questions, I know Dane's kind of wrapping up his prepared content, but will stay open as long as we have questions coming in. So if you want to understand more about Rhino Inside, if you have things, even if it's not like particularly relevant to the things that you've seen here, Dane is a great person to ask those questions to. But I'm just going to kind of encourage you guys, if you want to get that, now is a great time to put those in there. As Dane kind of keeps sharing. Can you go back to that graphic you had on the rooms? Because I just want to like watch the whole thing from the start of like all the rooms raining. And I know you've used that also on some of your projects, because I saw it in the graphic that you sent us.
Yeah, let me actually here I can show you a video that's even better.
Look at that. See, you asked the right question. You get more content than you're expecting. Thanks, Dane.
So this is, for example, this is a hospital with, I think, 12,000 rooms in it. But you'll notice something interesting. You can spot where the team forgot to make hallway rooms, like right there, right on the left, instantly. And they've been working on this model for what, 3 years, and haven't noticed that. But you look at a video once and you're like, oh man, on floors 3, 4, and 5, you miss hallways. Just by watching like a 10-second video, it's just displayed better. And they've been looking at Revit plans for 3 years and it doesn't look any different. So I can't. But yeah, that's that's another example of that tool. And that was just Revit export, or Rhino Inside just exports those frames, and you can just feel free to turn them into a video. So it really is.
It's a really powerful node, definitely.
And that's functionality that they've had a decade. It's just the animation node. But now I will say the thing that that steps it up even further is you can actually do rendered animations now too. This was something that you couldn't do for a long time. So if you want a rendered view in your video, that's totally fine too. So you could think about, if your marketing department has they like to have a video where they show all the collaborative spaces and then all the private offices and then all the whatever, like diagramming or any other number of things. This is super super powerful.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. No, thank you so much. As we kind of wrap up, you don't have to show anything, but can you talk about some other ways that you've used Rhino Inside? I know you've been using it for quite a bit. You've been doing some presentations. Do you have other thoughts on how people might be able to access it, if they're just kind of like more in the idea space than like examples?
Yeah, for sure. I think anything in your process that needs to be automated. We've been using Dynamo for that for a long time, and I will say right now, I'd say our firm is probably half and half. If it's a really simple, straightforward tool that a lot of users are using, I still use Dynamo, because managing a beta program and having to download the work in progress and that kind of thing, if you're giving it to users that just want to push a button and get a thing done, we're still kind of using Dynamo. But I think once it gets launched for real, we will be kind of switching over to Rhino Inside 100% for that kind of automation. I think where it is really different is, what I'm showing you now, this kind of what in your process is lacking aesthetic or clarity. Where do you really, you wouldn't think that being able to see all of the families in your Revit model would be a mind-blowing thing. But the fact that it's shown by a software that understands geometry and can render it correctly, paired with the meaningful data that's slowing down your Revit model. Well, that's a different case. And I think there are a lot of opportunities for just daylighting the things that have been in our model the whole time, but we just never really saw them as well as we could.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. This is a great presentation, and I really appreciate that you're also going to be sharing these with us. Like I said, I'll post those in the comments and then also on our Slack channel, so join that. And Dane, thanks so much, and we'll see the rest of you guys again later.
Thanks so much for having me. Take care, everybody.